So as the North Gauteng High Court declared some lockdown regulations invalid and unconstitutional, a recent survey has found that only 22% of the public actually believes the lockdown is too harsh. The COVID-19 Democracy Survey shows that 78% of South Africans are willing to sacrifice their human rights if it helps to control the spread of the virus. Now, this survey, conducted by UJ and the Human Sciences Research Council, shed some light into what South Africans think about the lockdown and its impact on their lives. To unpack it for us, we're joined now by Professor Carin Runciman, an Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Johannesburg. Professor, thanks very much for your time this morning on the AM report. It is surprising, isn't it, the fact that 78% of the respondents in this survey have responded in this way, saying that they're willing to sacrifice their human rights. Is that correct? Willing to sacrifice their human rights if it helps to curb the spread of the virus?
Yes, thanks. Good morning. Yes, we were also very surprised that the support for sacrificing human rights was so high. But I think what this does show is the extent to which people take the threat of the virus seriously, and how also the threat of the virus is seen almost to the same degree regardless of class, race, age. Although there are some important differences around who is willing to sacrifice human rights and also how that's been changing through time. This is an ongoing survey that's been conducted over 3 phases. And what we have seen is that there's been some decline in the support for that amongst particular groups, and particularly those who have been employed in kind of casual labour. And we would assume this is, of course, because they've been amongst the groups that have been most impacted by the lockdown regulations.
Actually, that was my next question for you. Break down for us, just give us some more detail on the respondents in this particular survey. 12,300 of them. If I take a look at the survey itself, it says mainly black and coloured people and predominantly younger than 40 years old.
Yes, that's right. So we have over 12,000 respondents. The vast majority of those, I think it's nearly 80%, are people from lower income households, with about 20% being from middle income households. But what we have been able to do is to weight this data against nationally representative statistics. So although the sample itself may not be representative of the population, we're able to analyse the data in such a way that it does become representative of the general views and experiences of the population.
Yeah, I'm just taking a look at the breakdown here of just, whether there are people with tertiary education, people who are employed, traditional leaders, local councillors. Tell me about the response here to the army in particular. The SANDF in particular has come under a lot of pressure for the way that it's enforced, at least in some parts, the lockdown in some parts of the country as well. What was the response there in particular to the army and how the army is doing its job?
What was very interesting is that more people believed the army was doing a good job compared to the police. Now, this might be based on the fact that it's more likely people have perhaps interacted with the police during conditions of lockdown, and maybe slightly less likely that they've directly interacted with the army. So a lot of this is based on perception rather than the direct experiences. But within the survey, we did find a small percentage of people, less than 10%, I believe, who have had a negative experience of alleged abuse from either the police or from the SANDF. So although this is a minority trend, it's obviously one which to be very, very concerned about. Yeah.
There's also a question around just how much ordinary people know about the outbreak of COVID-19 in South Africa. How would you unpack how they've rated their own knowledge about what's unfolding here?
So many people rate their knowledge as quite high, and it's interesting where they're getting their main sources of information from, with television and radio rating very, very highly. So it again puts the onus on outlets like yourself to make sure that you're delivering obviously good quality information to people. And also that information then corresponds to other views that people have about whether the threat of the virus is serious, which most people do think, but there is a minority who think that the threat of the virus is overblown. And of course, that then relates to behaviours. Behaviours like wearing a mask. If you think the threat of the virus is overblown, you're maybe less likely to take some of these protective measures that we're all being encouraged to take.
Obviously, we're all talking about the impact of the pandemic and the necessary lockdown on our lives in terms of our ability to earn an income, but there's also the issue around our emotional well-being during the time of the lockdown. What did you find there?
So what that's demonstrated is that over 60% of people recorded saying that they felt depressed or stressed, and that these levels were much higher than we would normally find in the population. Again, what was interesting was particularly who was experiencing those emotions, with men reporting slightly higher incidences of depression. There's also increases in loneliness as the lockdown has continued. And interestingly, feelings of loneliness seem to be particularly high among students and learners. This may be because they're maybe have become used to living in student residences with lots of other young people around, and they've now been taken out of that kind of social context. Very few people reported feeling happy during lockdown, only 12%. So it has demonstrated very severe, at some points, feelings of depression, stress and anxiety.
Professor, before we let you go, how are you hoping this perhaps will help government as we're now into the first week of level 3 of the lockdown, perhaps how it will help to inform government's response in the weeks and months to come? We know that the lockdown is going to be with us in some shape or form for the next couple of years, some people are saying. How are you hoping this survey will help?
This kind of research is really, really necessary, because we need to understand, first of all, how people view the virus and how it's also impacting their lives, and understanding what that means for them. Because once we actually understand what's happening in a society, it means that we can better craft our responses to how we do things like lockdown. And I think one of the things that this survey raises are important issues around hunger, and it really highlights the government response in terms of food parcels, obviously the 350 rand grant, which people have yet to see really in their pockets, that we need to make sure that we're taking this kind of action if we're going to alleviate the worst impacts of the lockdown.
And certainly there are arguments that the worst is yet to come as we continue to track the impact of the lockdown. Thanks so much for your time unpacking the results of that survey for us there. Professor Carin Runciman, she is from the University of Johannesburg.